everyone, it's Allison. Welcome to my YouTube channel and another video. I think this cold weather just has really motivated me and gotten me over that hump of the post-holiday blues. So here is the card we're going to be making in today's video. And this uses a die from the new Sweetheart release from Simon Says Stamp. And it's a really fun technique, so I hope you'll stick with me through the video to see how it all comes together. So here is the die that we're going to be using. It's the Whirl Diamond Plate, and it's just a really fun die. I have so many ideas for it, but let's look at what we're going to do today. So here's what the die looks like when you cut it out. Now, if you cut it out of a larger panel, you also get this fun border. Now the border is larger than A2. If you just cut that die out of an A2 panel, you wouldn't really get this nice scalloped border. And so this piece of paper that I cut it out from was 4 3/4 by 6 inches. And I'm going to keep this fun little scallop frame for later in the card. Now, one of my initial ideas when I started playing with this die a few weeks ago was to take 2 of the die cuts and offset them. And look at that fun little pattern that you get. And if you introduce a third color behind it, I just think it's really fun. Now, I was thinking of this idea, and then I thought, well, what if that back layer wasn't a die, but it was stamped? So that's how I came up with today's idea. We are going to stamp with the actual die cut. So here's my setup. I have my original sized Misty. And inside my Misty, I have, on the bottom, I have just 2 heavy pieces of white cardstock, kind of acting as shims. And I have my Simon Says Stamp and Stencil mat. It's going to hold my cardstock in place. And on the door of my Misty, I have my 6x6 Waffle Flower grip mat. And that is what's going to hold the stamp, or in this case, the die. So I have cut the die 3 times out of white cardstock, and I glued all the layers together. So this is pretty thick die cut right here. It's kind of hard to tell, but it's pretty solid and thick. And this is what we're going to stamp with. So I'm going to place it face down on the piece of paper just like you would a stamp. And before I start doing this, I'm going to take a step back. If you saw the video I did when the Waffle Flower grip mats first came out, you'll remember that, and I'll have a link to that video at the end of this video, by the way. You'll remember that one of the ways that I suggested you could use the Waffle Flower grip mats was to stamp your unmounted rubber stamps. And so this is how I came up with this idea. I'm going to use the grip mat on the door of my Misty to grip this die cut. And it's going to act like a stamp, like an unmounted stamp. And, you know, I didn't know if it was going to work, but let's see if it does. So I'm going to try to grip it. And at first it didn't grip. Now, this is what I do when the grip mat doesn't grip things. I first try to just wet it down, and that will kind of reintroduce some of its grip. And I also wasn't sure, maybe I didn't have enough shims in the back. But so the second try, it clung, and now I'm just going to press it in there. Now, because this die cut has so many holes, that was another reason why I was worried that it might not cling very well. I'm going to take some Distress Oxide, and I'm going to start stamping this die cut. And I'm using Oxide because of the pigment ink qualities. The ink is going to stay on the surface of the cardstock better than dye ink would. The dye ink would just kind of, seep into the paper. But because I'm stamping paper, the ink is going to want to go into the paper. So I'm going to have to stamp this multiple times. And I was using a blending brush because I didn't want harsh lines. I'm going to be doing 3 colors of ink here. Now, you'll see I'm kind of getting the pattern that's in that die cut. Now the stamping is not going to be perfect. This isn't a stamp. And I knew that going in. I knew it wasn't going to be perfect, but I think it's really fun. So I started with squeezed lemonade for my yellow, and as soon as I opened it, I realized, you know what? It's just too light, and because this isn't really a stamp, it's not going to make a great impression to begin with. I'm going to use a darker yellow, so I went with mustard seed. So I'm just going to keep stamping several times, and I'll press down on certain areas of the die to try to get a better impression. Now, if I were to do this again, I may avoid yellow on the white cardstock. I don't know, I just don't think it showed up as well. Another thought I had was maybe if the top layer of my stamp, or my die cut in this case, was glossy cardstock, maybe the ink would stay on the surface better and it would stamp better. I'm not sure. I'm happy with how it turned out. And, this is my first time trying this. So, like I said, I'm happy with the results. But going forward, I may try different things. It's all about experimenting and having fun. All right, so I'm going to go back with the yellow and the pink, and I'm trying to get a little bit more of that orange color going. And I had debated on bringing blue in at the bottom just to get a little bit more contrast at the bottom, but I didn't really want it to look too rainbowish. I do love pink and green, and that's why I needed yellow in between the two. All right, so here is my final stamping, and I just think it's really cool. It just gives the illusion of the die cut. Now here's the die cut. I have it on top of my grip mat. It's okay that it's not sticking. I didn't want to push down because this ink is wet. I just needed it to hold it enough for me to finish ink blending these colors. I'm just going to smooth out the ink blending that I had already done when I was using it as a stamp. So, and you'll see there I got green ink on my yellow brush. I'll just wipe it off on my cloth there. And of course, I realized I'm going to have to clean these brushes really well anyway, because I accidentally grabbed my regular ink brushes instead of my Oxide brushes. I do keep separate sets of brushes for my Oxides, and I just failed to grab those. So now that ink blending is done, we're going to see how this is going to go together. So there's my stamped panel, and here's my die. And I'm going to offset the two together so that you see the stamped pattern in those ovals. Now I can't just put the die on this panel because you'll see part of the panel, the die is hanging off part of the panel. And this is where this frame from earlier is going to come in handy. It's going to cover everything on the side. So it's going to make a nice clean border for this card. And so what I'm going to do right now is just cut off, I'm going to make some pencil marks on the left side and the top just to trim this panel down so it's kind of even all the way around. So, I was just kind of making this up as I went along. So what I'm doing are things that made sense to me at the time. So here's the panel all cut down, and you can see the edges of the die cut hang off of that back panel. Now I have a card base cut to the same size as this frame, which again was 4 3/4 by 6 inches. And I'm going to tape this card base shut. You don't see me doing this in videos very often, but I do this with every card base. It just makes it easier to glue things to your card base. It makes it easier to take pictures of your cards because, the card's not flapping open while you're trying to take a picture. So what I'm doing is putting this frame down. And I need to know where to glue my die cut. So I'm going to just take a pencil and make a mark in each corner of this frame. Because remember, I already have a back on my die, that stamped panel. So I can't just glue this frame down right now. I need to put the frame on second. So this is going to help me mark where to put the die. So you'll see how those marks are going to help me. And now I'm going to go ahead and glue this die to the stamped panel. And you'll see, you know, some of these areas are pretty delicate. So I'm just kind of going in stripes down one side. And then I'll put a stripe of glue down in the other direction. And now I'm ready to glue to this stamped panel. And because the corners and all the edges of my die are hanging off this panel, I'll still be able to line it up with those marks that I made on the card base. So now I can go ahead and glue this panel to the card base. And you might be thinking, why didn't she just trim that stamped panel and then just glue this onto a card base? That just would have been a pain, I think, because of all those curves and like the lines on this die are so skinny. And because I had already cut a die from a white piece of cardstock and ended up with that frame, it was just easier to me to use the frame to finish this card. I don't know, to me it was just a lot easier and faster. And, you know, now I have an extra white die cut to use on another card. So because this is a pretty thick die, you remember it's 3 pieces of cardstock glued together, this single frame, I just need to push it down. And that's what you see me doing here. I'm just pushing it all the way down to the card base. So, you know, now that die cut is popped up. It does just look like I glued a die cut onto a card base. So, you know, the overall effect of this card is it looks like a pretty simple card, right? I don't think you would look at it and be like, oh, wow, there's so much technique in this card. But you and I both know that there was. So now I am taking some jewels. These happen to be Pinkfresh jewels, all the colored ones in my little container. And I'm just putting corresponding colors into each of these ovals. So I have a pink jewel, it's kind of a light orange jewel, a yellow jewel, and then there's 2 colors of green jewels. And the colors worked out pretty well. I'm pretty happy with that. So there's the finished base. And here is the actual finished card. Now I did end up putting it on a black card base. I just thought it looked better framed with black. So my overall card now is 5 inches by 6 1/4 inches. And I can put that in a 5 by 7 envelope. The little flower is the layered Perky flower. And I just did some simple ink blending to kind of tie it in with the ink blending on the panel. And then I just added a sweet little sentiment. This is from the reverse, I think, All the Love sentiment strips from Simon. If you're not familiar with their sentiment strips, they're really fun. They're just handy dandy little sentiments that you can just cut apart and stick on a card. So that is it for my card today. I hope I didn't go through that too quickly, and I hope it made sense what I did. This is my first time doing this, and it certainly won't be my last. I think it was really fun, and doing it with the Waffle Flower grip mat, I don't know, it just made it a lot easier. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe. Take care. Bye-bye.